Well, 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 it's time for chapter 6 of Finn Family Moomintroll, written and illustrated by Tove Jansson and published by Puffin. Chapter 6, in which Thingamy and Bob bringing a mysterious suitcase and followed by the Groke come into our story, and in which the Snork leads a court case. Early one morning at the beginning of August, Thingamy and Bob came walking over the mountain and stopped just where Sniff had found the hobgoblin's hat. Thingamy wore a red cap and Bob carried an enormous suitcase. They had come a very long way and were rather tired, so they rested for a bit and looked down over the valley of the Moomins, where the smoke from Moomin House was rising between the silver poplars and the plum trees. "Smoke," said Thingamy. "Folk means smood," said Bob, nodding. And they began to wander down to the valley, talking in the strange way that Thingamys and Bobs do talk. It isn't clear to everyone, but the main thing is that they understand each other. Very cautiously, they tiptoed up to the house and stood shyly by the front steps. "Do you think we could go in?" asked Thingamy. "It depends," said Bob. "Don't be frightened if they're gross and crumpy." "Shall we knock on the door?" suggested Thingamy. "But imagine if someone comes out and screams." Just then Moomin Mama stuck her head out of the window and shouted, "Coffee!" Thingamy and Bob were so dreadfully frightened that they jumped into the opening of the potato cellar. "Oh," said Moomin Mama with a start, "I believe those were mice disappearing into the cellar. Sniff, run down with a little milk for them." She caught sight of the suitcase, which stood by the steps. "Luggage too," thought Moomin Mama. "Dear me, then they've come to stay." And she went off to look for Moomin Papa to ask him to put up 2 more beds, very, very small ones. Meanwhile, Thingamy and Bob had dug themselves into the potato so that only their eyes could be seen, and there they waited in terror for what might happen to them. "Anyway, I can fell smood," muttered Thingamy. "Somebody's coming," whispered Bob. "Sot a nound." The cellar door creaked, and at the top of the steps stood Sniff with a lantern in one paw and a saucer of milk in the other. "Hi, where are you?" he shouted. Thingamy and Bob crept still further down and held on to each other tight. "Will you have some milk?" said Sniff. "Don't make any totis," whispered Bob. "Do you think I'm going to stand here half the day?" said Sniff angrily. "Well, you're mistaken. I suppose you don't know any better, silly old mice who haven't had the sense to come in by the front door." "Milly old souse yourself," retorted Thingamy and Bob, who were seriously upset by this. So they're foreigners," thought Sniff. "I'd better fetch Moomin Mama." And he locked the cellar door and ran to the kitchen. "Well, did they like the milk?" Moomin Mama said. "They talk a foreign language," said Sniff. "Nobody can understand what they say." "What's it like?" asked Moomintroll, who was shelling peas with a hemulin. "Milly old souse yourself," said Sniff. Moomin Mama sighed. "Well, this is going to be a nice mix-up," she said. "How shall I be able to find out what they want for pudding on their birthday, or how many pillows they like to have?" "We'll soon learn their language," said Moomintroll. "It sounds easy." "I think I understand them," said the hemulin reflectively. "Didn't they tell Sniff he was a silly old mouse?" Sniff blushed and tossed his head. "Go and talk to them yourself if you're so clever," he said. So the hemulin lumbered away to the cellar steps and called out silently, "Welcome to Hoomin Mouse." Thingamy and Bob stuck their heads out of the potato pile and looked at him. "Me's some hilk," continued the hemulin, and then they scampered up the steps and into the drawing room. Sniff looked at them, and he noticed that they were much smaller than he was, so he felt kinder and said condescendingly, "Hello, nice to see you." "Thanks, yame to sue," said Thingamy. "Did I fell smood?" inquired Bob. "What do they say now?" asked Moomin Mama. "They are hungry," says the hemulin, "but they still don't take to Sniff." "Give them my compliments then," said Sniff hotly, "and say that never in my life have I seen 2 such herring faces, and now I'm going out." "Piff is sneevish," said the hemulin. "Make no totis." "Anyway, come in and have some coffee," said Moomin Mama nervously, and she showed Thingamy and Bob out onto the veranda. The hemulin, who was very proud of his new rank as interpreter, followed them. And that was how Thingamy and Bob came to live at the Moomin house. They didn't make much noise, spent most of their time hand in hand, never lost sight of their suitcase. But towards dusk on that first day they began to get very worried, and they ran frantically up and downstairs several times and eventually hid under the drawing-room carpet. "What's the watter?" asked the Hemulin. "The Groke is coming," whispered Bob. "Groke? Who's that?" asked the Hemulin, getting a little bit frightened. "Tig and Brim and Gerrible," said Bob. "Lock the door against her." The Hemulin ran to Moomin Mama and told her the awful news. "They say that a big, grim and terrible Groke is coming here. We must lock the doors tonight." "But I don't think any of the doors have keys, except the cellar," said Moomin Mama in a worried voice. "Dear me, it's always the same with foreigners," and she went to talk to Moomin Papa about it. "We must arm ourselves and move the furniture in front of the door," declared Moomin Papa. "A large Groke like that may be dangerous. I shall set an alarm clock in the drawing-room, and Thingamy and Bob can sleep under my bed." But Thingamy and Bob had already crept into a bureau drawer and refused to come out. Moomin Papa shook his head. He went to the woodshed for his blunderbuss. The evenings were already beginning to draw in. The glowworms were out with their little torches, and the garden was filled with black velvet shadows. The wind soughed drearily through the trees. Moomin Papa felt an uncanny feeling creeping over him as he went down the path. Suppose this Groke were hiding under a bush. What did she look like? And above all, how big was she? When he came in again, he put the sofa in front of the door and he said, "We must leave the light on all night. You must all be on the alert. Snufkin must sleep indoors." It was terribly exciting. Then he knocked on the bureau drawer and he said, "We shall protect you." But there was no answer, so he pulled the drawer out to see if Thingamy and Bob had already been kidnapped. However, they slept peacefully, and beside them lay their suitcase. "Anyway, let's go to bed," said Moomin Papa, "but arm yourselves, all of you." With much noise and clatter they went off to their rooms, and presently silence reigned in the Moomin house, while the solitary kerosene lamp burned on the drawing-room table. It was midnight, and then 1 o'clock struck. A little after 2, the muskrat woke up and wanted to get out of bed. He staggered sleepily downstairs and stopped in amazement in front of the sofa which stood across the door. "What an idea!" he muttered, trying to drag it away, and then, of course, the alarm clock that Moomin Papa had put there started ringing. And in a moment the house was filled with screams and shots and the stamping of feet as everyone came rushing down to the drawing-room, armed with axes and spades and rakes and stones and knives and scissors, and stood glaring at the muskrat. "Where's the Groke?" demanded Moomintroll. "Oh, no, it was only me," said the muskrat peevishly. "I wanted to look at the stars. I forgot all about your stupid Groke." "Then go outside at once," said Moomintroll, "but don't do it again." And he threw the door open, and then they saw the Groke. Everybody saw her. She sat motionless on the sandy path at the bottom of the steps, and she stared at them with round, expressionless eyes. She was not particularly big. She didn't look dangerous either, but you felt that she was terribly evil and would wait forever. That was awful. Nobody plucked up enough courage to attack. She sat there for a while and then slid away into the darkness. But where she'd been sitting, the ground was frozen. The Snork shut the door and shook himself. "Poor Thingamy and Bob," he said. "Hey, Moo, look and see if they're awake." They were. "Has she gone?" asked Thingamy. "Yes, you can peep in Sleece now," replied the Hemulin. Thingamy sighed a little and said, "Thank goodness," and they pulled the suitcase with them as far into the drawer as possible and went to sleep again. "Can we go back to bed now?" asked Moomin Mama, putting down her axe. "Yes, Mother," said Moomintroll. "Snufkin and I will stand guard until the sun gets up. But put your handbag under your pillow to be on the safe side." And then they sat alone in the drawing-room and played poker till the morning, and no more was heard of the Groke that night. The next morning the Hemulin went anxiously out to the kitchen, and he said, "I've been talking to Thingamy and Bob." "Well, what is it now?" asked Moomin Mama with a sigh. "It's their suitcase the Groke wants," explained the Hemulin. "What a monster!" burst out Moomin Mama. "To steal their small possessions from them." "Yes, I know," said Hemulin, "but there is something that makes the whole thing complicated. It seems to be the Groke's suitcase." Agreed Moomin Mama. "That certainly makes the situation more difficult. We'll talk to the Snork. He always arranges things so well." The Snork was interested. "It's a remarkable case," he said. "We must hold a meeting. Everyone will come to the lilac bushes at 3 o'clock to discuss the question." It was one of those lovely warm afternoons, full of the scent of flowers and the humming of bees, and the garden was brilliant with the deep colours of late summer. The muskrat's hammock was hung between 2 bushes, and on it was a notice which said, "Prosecutor for the Groke." The Snork himself, in a wig, was sitting in front of a box. Everyone could see that he was the judge. Opposite him sat Thingamy and Bob eating cherries in the prisoner's dock. "I wish to be their prosecutor," said Sniff, who hadn't forgotten that they called him a silly old mouse. "In that case I'll be their counsel for the defence," said the Hemulin. "What about me?" asked the Snork Maiden. "You can be the Moomin family's witness," said her brother, "and Snufkin can make notes concerning the proceedings of the court. But you're to do it properly, Snufkin." "Why doesn't the Groke have a counsel for the defence?" asked Sniff. "That isn't necessary," replied the Snork, "because the Groke is in the right. Everything clear now? Okay, we'll begin." And he banged 3 times on the box with a hammer. "May you kick it out?" asked Thingamy. "What nutch?" said Bob, blowing a cherry stone at the judge. Great picture of the cherry stone spitting moment here. Look at him. I don't know if you've ever spat cherry stones, but if you haven't, it's a treat you wouldn't want to miss. Where was I? "May you kick it out?" asked Thingamy. "What nutch?" said Bob, blowing a cherry stone at the judge. "You're not to speak until I say so," said the Snork. "Yes or no, nothing more. Is the said suitcase yours or the Groke's?" "Yes," said Thingamy. "No," said Bob. "Write that down, that they contradicted each other," screamed Sniff. The Snork banged on a box. "Quiet!" he cried. "Now I'm asking for the last time. Whose suitcase is it?" "Ours," said Thingamy. "Now they say it's theirs," moaned the Hemulin in despair. "This morning they said the opposite." "Well then, we don't have to give it to the Groke," said the Snork with a sigh of relief, "but it is a pity after all my arrangements." Thingamy leant forward and whispered something to the Hemulin. "They say," he declared, "that it is only the contents of the suitcase that belong to the Groke." "Ha!" said Sniff. "I can well believe that. Now everything is perfectly clear. The Groke gets her contents back and the herring faces keep their old suitcase." "It's not clear at all," cried the Hemulin boldly. "The question is not who is the owner of the contents, but who has the greater right to the contents. The right thing in the right place. You saw the Groke, everybody. Now I ask you, did she look as if she had the right to the contents?" "That's true enough," said Sniff in surprise. "Clever of you, Hemel. But on the other hand, think how lonely the Groke is because nobody likes her, and she hates everybody. The contents is perhaps the only thing she has. Would you like her to take that away from her too, lonely and rejected in the night?" And Sniff became more and more affected, and his voice trembled. "Cheated out of her only possession by Thingamy and Bob." He blew his nose. He couldn't go on. The Snork banged the box. "The Groke doesn't need any defence," he said, "because your point of view is emotional, and so is the Hemulin's. Witness forward. Speak up." "We like Thingamy and Bob very much," said the Moomin family's witness. "We disapproved of the Groke from the beginning. It's a pity if she must have her contents back." "Right is right," said the Snork solemnly. "You must be fair, particularly as Thingamy and Bob can't see the difference between right and wrong. They were born like that and can't help it. Prosecutor, what have you to say?" But the muskrat had gone to sleep in his hammock. "Well, well," said the Snork. "I'm sure he wasn't interested anyway. Have we all said what we should say before I pronounce the verdict?" "Excuse me," said the Moomin family's witness. "Wouldn't it be easier if we knew what the contents actually are?" Thingamy whispered something again. The Hemulin nodded. "It's a secret," he said. "Thingamy and Bob think the contents is the most beautiful thing in the world, but the Groke just thinks it's the most expensive." The Snork nodded many times and wrinkled his forehead. "This is a difficult case," he said. "Thingamy and Bob have reasoned correctly, but they have acted wrongly. Right is right. I must think. Quiet now." It was quite quiet amongst the lilac bushes, except for the humming of the bees, while the garden baked in the sunshine. Suddenly, a cold draught swept over the grass. The sun went behind a cloud, and the garden looked dull. "What was that?" said Snufkin, and he lifted his pen from the notes. "She's here again," whispered the Snork Maiden. In the frozen grass sat the Groke, glaring at them. She fixed her gaze on Thingamy and Bob, began growling, and shambled even closer. "Hopster! Hopster! Help! Help! Stopster!" they screamed, getting quite incoherent in their terror. "Stop, Groke," said the Snork. "I have something to say to you." The Groke stopped. "I have thought enough," went on the Snork. "Will you agree to Thingamy and Bob buying the contents of the suitcase, and if so, what is your price?" "High," said the Groke in an icy voice. "Would my gold mountain on the Hattifatner's Island be enough?" asked the Snork. "No," answered the Groke as icily as before, but just then Moominmama noticed how cold it got, and she decided to fetch her shawl, so she ran through the garden, where the frost marked the Groke's tracks, and up to the veranda, and there she had an idea. She picked up the hobgoblin's hat and went back to the court proceedings and put the hat on the grass and said, "Here is the most valuable thing in the whole of Moomin Valley, Groke. Do you know what has grown out of this hat? Raspberry juice and fruit trees and the most beautiful little self-propelling clouds. It's the only hobgoblin's hat in the world." "Show," said the Groke scornfully. Then Moominmama laid a few cherries in the hat, and everyone waited in dead silence. "If only they don't turn into something nasty," whispered Snufkin to the Emmeline, but they were in luck. When the Groke looked into the hat, a handful of red rubies lay there. "There," said Moominmama happily. "To think what would happen if you put a pumpkin in it." The Groke looked at the hat, and then she looked at Thingamy and Bob, and then she looked at the hat again. You could see she was thinking with all her might. Suddenly she snatched the hat and without a word slithered like an icy grey shadow into the forest. It was the last time she was seen in the Valley of the Moomins, the last they saw of the hobgoblin's hat too. At once the colours became warmer again. The garden was filled with the sounds and scents of summer. "Well, thank goodness we've got rid of that hat," said Moominmama, "and now it's done something sensible for once." "But the clouds were fun," said Sniff. "And playing Tarzan in the jungle," added Moomintroll sadly. "Good root giddens to rad bubbish," said Thingamy, taking the suitcase in one hand and Bob in the other, and together they walked off towards Moomin House while the others stood looking after them. "Well, what do they say now?" asked Sniff. "Well, good afternoon is near enough," said the Emmeline. That is the end of Chapter 6 of Finn Family Moomintroll, and I would dearly love to read you Chapter 7, but I can't do it now. It's time for something else, surely for you as well. So I will have to ask you to be good, look after each other, be kind, stay safe, and I will see you soon. Stay safe. Bye.